Today's speaker will be introduced by Dr. Brian Skean. Dr. Skean is Director of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry Training and the Director of College Mental Health, amongst other many jobs.
Thank you, Dr. Rothschild. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Alair Newman, our Grand Round speaker today. Dr. Newman comes from Case Western University, where she received her bachelor's degree before moving on to Kansas City University of Biosciences in 2018, where she graduated with her medical degree. In between there, she had stops in Amsterdam, studying skateboarding culture there, as well as time on an inpatient psychiatric unit in the Cleveland Clinic. Here, she has been active in all elements of her training, including being involved with the community intervention program here at UMass. And she will be talking about one of the programs that she has been involved with for quite a number of years now, the Sibling Support Program. We're very much looking forward to her talk and want to congratulate her on her recent accepted position at Cambridge Health Alliance following graduation this summer, where she will be doing work on an inpatient child and adolescent unit. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. Newman, who will be talking about Oh Brother, How Art Thou? Sibling Support and a Family-Centered Approach to Care for Youth with Mental Health Needs. Dr. Newman.
Thank you, Dr. Skean, for such a nice introduction, and everybody in the room for clapping, and hello to everyone on Zoom. As mentioned today, I'll be talking about sibling support with a family-centered approach to care for youth with mental health needs. This is something that's near and dear to my training and my personal experience. I have no conflicts of interest financially or personally to disclose. So there's going to be three kind of key objectives that we talk about today in a giant scope of material. So I'm going to try to stick to those. First, starting with a review of the current stats and trends of child and adolescent mental health care, as moving on to identifying the core principles of a family-centered approach and the various roles and needs of siblings. So we're going to kind of take a smaller view at the impact of mental health needs on the siblings of those children. And then even further, specifically talking about the UMass Sibling Support Program, its history, structure, future directions, clinical takeaways. So because a lot of my talk is kind of conceptualization of different theories, I thought we would start at least with some cold hard stats. The CDC from 2016 to 2019 estimates that for 3 to 17-year-olds, a whopping 2.7 million will have been diagnosed at some point with depression, 5.8 million with anxiety, and 5.5 million with what would fall under the category of behavior disorders. This is a pretty impressive number, but it's also important to remember that these conditions are often co-occurring, especially for those children diagnosed with depression. They're more likely to have co-occurring disorders. Specifically 3 in 4 children who were initially diagnosed with depression will also go on to have anxiety, and 1 in 2 also had behavioral problems. And it's important also to recognize that while these stats kind of give you an overview of 2016 and 2019, the prevalence of mental disorders change with age among the children going through this population. Depression and anxiety becoming more common with increased age, and then that even kind of splintering off into its own demographic hierarchies of gender and kind of socioeconomic status. And then also behavioral problems are most common among children 6 to 11. So we still kind of imagine 6 to 11-year-olds presenting with a lot of behavioral externalizing aggressive issues that they're dealing with. An important diagnosis that we did not talk about before on the other slide is autism spectrum disorder, which has drastically increased in the last couple decades as far as prevalence. At this point, the 2020 projection is that 1 in 54 children will be diagnosed with autism. Additionally, important to note that while autism diagnosis is seen across age, gender, race, socioeconomic status, it varies widely, not only by geographic location, as you can see here, to go to the CDC website, you can play around with this little map and see where prevalence can differ among states. And then also important to note that it has specific, you'll see higher quantities of diagnoses in boys. They'll be about 4 times as likely to have a diagnosis of autism. So we're going to keep this diagnosis in mind and talking about how we can support patients that we see commonly in clinic and in the community. So a really, I think, aesthetically pleasing graph here on the left to really talk about how the impacts of these diagnoses on the individual are significant in, you know, their quality of life and daily living, but also their significant impacts on society and the unique family kind of dynamic as well. As far as society, the rate of suicide death among youth 12 to 17 increased from 3.7 to 6.3% per 100,000, which is a pretty significant jump, and for such a mortal kind of outcome for a lot of these teens. And as far as on the American Bar website, you can find out that about 65 to 70% of the youth who are currently held in a juvenile detention center also have diagnosable mental illness. So this idea that a lot of our treatment or even kind of assessment of mental illness at times can be on a juvenile admission versus kind of in the community where other people were raising red flags. So specifically going to the impacts on family, and not to brush over anything at all, but it's just such a vast topic that we're going to stick with the family here. Dealing with a child who has a mental health diagnosis, whether it's new or kind of chronic, it takes up a lot of time and resources as far as caregivers, a lot of specialized appointments, maybe transitioning from inpatient care to outpatient care, talking with different providers about how to set up really significant support systems in the community, all while maintaining either, you know, your own employment and mental health, and whether or not that could be splintered and shared with other siblings in the family. There's increased psychological stress in caregivers. The family house, more often than not, becomes kind of a very difficult environment. You feel like walking on eggshells. You don't really know what's going to come next, especially in siblings. So a lot of the times siblings will often fear, and for good reason, that they're going to end up taking on a caregiving role for their sibling when parents kind of are becoming older and later in life. And this actually for girls tends to be more true than not. There also shows that there's an increase in chronic diseases, anxiety, and depression for those living within the household of a patient who had recently been diagnosed with a mental illness. So just for some kind of numbers and statistics, we're going to move into this idea of family-centered care and the various roles and needs of siblings, but not without first trying my best to rapidly review about 90 years of child and adolescent psychiatry history. So on the left here, I'm going to grab something like we have the first pediatric hospital, and that was in France in 1802. So kind of this idea that children are not just little adults, there was actually specialized care for pediatrics. And then following suit shortly thereafter, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia was the first pediatric hospital in 1805. As far as what comes next, and again, not to gloss over this giant history, you often find that children who had been diagnosed with serious mental illness or cognitive disabilities, behavioral issues, ended up along the path of institutionalization for either months or years, and would often kind of be stuck in these systems without much discussion or thought about community care. Right here on the left in Waltham, actually, I learned a lot during research and how much Massachusetts is involved with a lot of these things, is the Fernald Center. In 1848, it was founded and actually originally called the Experimental School for Teaching and Training Idiotic Children. The name leaves much to be desired. They also had kind of some scandals that later on realized were not very ethical in medicine. that being said, there was focus around treatment and containment of aggressive behaviors and concerning mental illness for children in the community. So fast forwarding to France again and the introduction of chlorpromazine, which kind of was a breakthrough in psychiatry and psychiatric pharmacology for treatment of a lot of serious mental illness, as well as the original founding of the American Academy at this time of Child Psychiatry in Cleveland, Ohio, and the 70th anniversary is coming up on February 22nd. So with this in mind, there was a lot of focus on deinstitutionalization, getting children out of hospitals into the community, and then kind of along with that, recognizing that children spend a significant amount of time of their life outside in school. And in the 70s, there was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and then the American with Disabilities Act, which really focused on child psychiatrists providing mental health care in the school system as well. So just fast forwarding again to this deinstitutionalization, kind of focusing on the hospital to home, community psychiatry, and therefore the adjustment of the community to psychiatric patients and patients to the community. Often family members were responsible for caregiving, and in that umbrella of family members comes siblings as well. Family-centered care there was increased recognition during times of hospitalization about the traumatic effects of family and siblings not really being a part of the patient's care during their hospitalization. So certain policies were put in place to increase the allowing of family to room in, visit during visiting hours, have sibling visits, accompany children to surgeries. So kind of things that nowadays where if you've ever worked in like anesthesia, then a parent can kind of hold their kid as they're going back to the OR, this idea that it's in the child's best interest, and kind of also therefore the teams, if there's a way to have the child feel a little more at peace during such a strenuous time. So bear with me here. This is one fellow kind of conceptualization of what it means to treat child and youth with mental health issues in the community. So there's almost an unlimited degree of freedom on the various ways that day-to-day interactions can impact your functioning. There's demographics, age, sex, socioeconomic status, ethnicity, gender identity, also the neighborhood that you grew up in. I feel like everybody in here might have grown up in a different neighborhood where there's different values on things. If you're from a Midwest town, it might be everybody's interest in football versus maybe it's a town where arts and music is a big deal. So whether or not you kind of fit into that or don't, however you define that, can also impact your own kind of sense of self. The school system, peer groups, the internet, a lot of this kind of unexplored mental health impact of the internet on child and adolescents could be its own talk. But in terms of simplicity, I'm going to just be talking about the family unit today. And in terms of definitions, as far as caregivers, this isn't always the parents. I feel like very often we'll think of it as the parents of the child, but this can also very often be grandparents, aunts, uncles, foster parents, DCF workers, whoever is really the primary caretaker for the patient that we're talking about. And then siblings as well, could be biological siblings, half siblings, cousins, basically whoever's also growing up alongside you in the home. This is my analogy, again, bear with me here, of I'm sitting here thinking about kind of what to compare a well-functioning kind of role of a child with mental health issues in the community and things that it might relate to. So this idea that a child could be the train and the tracks and the various terrains that we go through in life kind of being the support system in the family unit. So yes, there are times when the train may be out of gas, it may very well be on fire. And at that point, it makes a lot of sense to stop what's going on, focus on the train, put out the fire, fill up the tank, whatever needs to go on. That being said, it behooves us to also simultaneously think about, okay, when we get this train back on the tracks, how can we make sure that certain roads have been paved over, certain bridges have been built, certain, strengths that you've realized have been helpful in the past, you can use those tools to come up with a different route. And these are going to change throughout life as children go through the kind of the natural progression of different milestones. So think of it however you will. I'm thinking about it like this train and the tracks. So there is this idea kind of stemming from research on the impact of separation from families in child hospitalizations called family-centered healthcare, really purported by the Academy of Pediatrics with several key principles, which all kind of sound, of course, they make sense. Information sharing, respect and honoring differences, partnership, collaboration, negotiation, and then specifically care in the context of family and community. So direct medical care and decision-making reflect the child within the context of his or her family, home, school, daily activities, and quality of life within the community. So while these key principles make sense and are a good guideline, I really want to focus on the care in the context of family and community. So taking, for example, I often, at least at the beginning of my training, would hear about a family structure. You meet a child, whether they're known to you or not, you can read up on notes, you hear about the family relationship, you think of, okay, the parents are the main caregivers. But what I think we often don't think about is how many of these dyadic kind of individual one-on-one back and forth dynamic relationships that can be in a family. So this little family of 4, I've tried to create lines for each person. So between the family of 4, there's the parents' interaction with each other, each siblings' interaction with each other, each sibling's interaction with a parent separately. So to make this really emotional, there's actually a algorithm for it. So if you think about my family of 5, there's several dyadic relationships. And a family such as like that we all grew up with on TV, the Kardashians, with 8, there's 28 different dyadic relationships. So when someone walks into your office, it's kind of important to think about all of these relationships kind of even just in the house, not even thinking about out there in the community. There is one way to think about the sibling experience, which is a kind of a typically developing pair in which you often experience competition, differentiation, negotiation, justice versus equality. We can kind of go through this. So here at the top left, we have the 2 Kelsey brothers that I actually grew up with in Cleveland Heights. And I remember watching them play football against each other, always competing to get better, a really friendly kind of sibling rivalry. And now both will have played in the Super Bowl. And here they are representing Cleveland Heights, where we grew up. Super nice kids, really all about giving back to the community. But watching that competition between them is kind of an example of what that persistence can really get you. That being said, there's also competition for resources, attention, social capital. A lot of this falls on resources of the parents' attention, resources being the parents' time, positive attention, special time, social capital, as far as, sometimes siblings might be close in age. And watching another sibling kind of be supported by a peer group that maybe you want to be in or you think is cool can really have an impact on how you go about making your own decisions. Differentiation can also be another way to go about it. You see a sibling who is a certain way and you think, okay, I know how to stand out and get attention is by being the complete opposite. Whether that's intentional or not, it is something that is often seen. And down here on the right is an example from one of my favorite TV shows growing up is Daria and her sister Quinn, and they were totally different, but it made for really good entertainment because I think a lot of people could also relate to that. Something that's really common that keeps coming up is conflict negotiation, and justice versus equality. Conflict negotiation. I wouldn't know from a parent point of view, but I've heard over and over and over how annoying it is when me and my sisters fight. That sense has slowed down. And I think this average that I found from different papers of about 7 conflicts an hour might be an undershot for what my experience was. That being said, parents often struggle with at what point do I intervene? At what point do I let them learn how to resolve this on their own? But it definitely is a source of contention. And then something that is really difficult, I think, for a lot of children to grasp is this justice versus equality. And a lot of times there's barriers just by physical ability. I'm upset because my sister can ride a bike and I can't. That's not fair. But you physically can't ride a bike. So there's a lot of grasping what is fair, what is equal. That being said, these things kind of don't fall to the wayside, but they're painted in a different light when you're growing up with a sibling who has a mental illness. Justice versus equality in terms of expectations can become a really big issue. And then a lot of internalizing thoughts and behaviors, not really knowing how to talk about that too, can go on. So when we think about siblings in the home, the number of children living with siblings, 0 to 17 by the presence of parents is here in this graph. And a statistic that came up recently was that you are more likely to have a sibling in your home than your biological father, which is an interesting way of thinking of how strong that dynamic can be as you kind of navigate some pretty significant life developmental milestones together. But when your sibling you notice is impacted by their illness, and the family is as well, there's a lot of things that can come up. Several of them I saw as thematic over and over, such as confusion. Why is this person in my house behaving in a way that I cannot quite predict? There's no way to understand like what is going to create a conflict, what is not. If they're having a good day versus bad day, it doesn't really kind of compare to the social norm that children do a lot of their learning from. And this is in their home. Safety, there's a lot of issues sometimes with like behavioral aggression, making it really difficult at times from what I've read for children to even focus in school. So that's where it can really impact kind of what their job basically is. Parentification of parents, of the siblings, as well as increased independence can, sometimes we say this as if it's a bad thing. It doesn't have to be to be almost thrusted into this role of learning how to self-regulate and kind of take care of somebody else, take on a lot more responsibilities. But also we have to step back and think in the context of childhood, is this appropriate to kind of place, whether intentionally or not, on another sibling? There's a lot of themes of overprotectiveness because society can be very cruel to things that they don't understand, such as mental illness. And so that was a theme that came up a lot of, I want to shelter my sibling, I want to protect them, I don't want anyone to make fun of them. Kind of a lot of this holding environment so that the other people can't really get there or hurt them. Again, competing for attention, always going to be a thing. But in this case, oftentimes the attention is because of the train is on fire kind of thing. And so there's a lot of grappling with, okay, if that's how to get attention, then I'm going to do that. Or, now that sibling is stable, it's my turn to act out. And I think personally, there's a lot of resonance in these. When I was growing up with an older sibling who ended up being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, but being 4 years younger and watching kind of how it impacted our family, it was very confusing in terms of unpredictability of behaviors. And then also, I think we don't realize how sensitive kids are to a shift in tension in the household, whether or not it's intentional. There's a love-hate relationship that's common with siblings, but it's a little more intense in the way that it's been described in the literature for siblings with children with mental illness, and a lot of anger and resentment. And oftentimes that anger and resentment doesn't really have an outlet to be expressed. And frequently it can more so breed contempt, which again stresses a lot of kids out with this idea of, when our parents are no longer able to take care of you, is that going to be my job? I don't even know how to relate to you. So a lot, again, about fairness. There's behavioral expectations for a sibling with mental illness that are being placed on them that aren't really equal to the ones that are being placed on me. A lot of times you often see difficulty with routines being different, watching your sibling act out, you know, in a way that would be described as inappropriate if you did, say screaming in a grocery store. Not okay for that sibling. And it's difficult for a child to really conceptualize that, especially as well as academic expectations, attendance, assignment completion, grades. Sometimes kids can take this on almost too far in an unhealthy way of, okay, well, I'm the good kid, I'm the academic kid, I produce results, but that is also something I think to check in on. As far as the population we're dealing with, there's a lot of difficulty verbalizing feelings about this shared uncomfortable experience that we're all living in. Again, children have a unique sense of sensing the stress of their parents. There's a lot of societal and family even stigma about mental illness. Specifically, a lot of times you hear children saying, you know, did I cause this? Is this contagious? Am I going to get this when I get older? Am I going to make this worse if I, you know, express my needs for the day and theirs go unnoticed? Am I going to be a good caretaker if I'm expected to be growing up later on in life? Am I going to have resentment? So that being said, I wanted to share specifically one of the peer support groups that we have in place here at UMass that I've been involved with since first year, almost accidentally at first, but then very intentionally thereafter, because it has really opened my eyes to different way of thinking about how to support siblings for this unique kind of lived experience where it's a very behind closed doors kind of discussion feeling topic. I have here the creator of the Sibling Support Program. She is joining us from lovely California. Emily's on Zoom, so she's not going to be presenting per se today, but she's available to help answer questions in the chat if that's an option. So I'm going to do my best to give her credence here. So about 10, 12 years ago, after talking with Emily, she discussed that she had noticed there's a lot of limited resources for family members of children with mental health needs. She noted significant impact that these behaviors have on the family unit, including stress, resiliency, trauma. So she set out to create a program that specifically supported the siblings and caregivers of these children with mental health needs. In 2011, there was a IRB piloted research IRB approved research study at Cambridge Health Alliance, where they asked a couple of specific research questions, such as, does participating in this group increase the sibling knowledge of coping skills? Does it provide new opportunities for siblings to discuss with peers and adults their mental health condition and the impact on their lives? And similar questions for the caregivers. What's unique about this is that it was on an inpatient setting. So these children had been hospitalized for acute stabilization of mental health needs. And that is when the siblings and parents were able to come to the unit, engage in these process groups, which had a structured format, and work through certain things which I don't think a lot of us think about, but were common themes such as, what do you tell other people about like where your sibling is? Oftentimes it was a really difficult conversation, and out of last resort, you would feel comfortable saying, let's tell people that they're on vacation or they're at grandma's. But something I thought that was really unique that they gave the opportunity to the child was to say, hey, here's a few different ways we can describe what's going on. Which one would you like us to tell people in case they ask? You're sick in the hospital and you need to get some help. You needed some alone time with some more supports. all of which kind of aiming at speaking the truth without taking away any of the choice in the narrative as well. Often there's a lot of times that siblings and caregivers, understandably so, feel it's just easier to kind of come up with an alternative description of what's going on because you don't want to have that conversation yourself. Other people might not understand. So this was a pretty cool, unique way of getting into the units and doing something unique. There also was this 2019 paper where the Cambridge Health Alliance residents helped do some research, and I learned about word clouds, where the more frequently used a word was, the larger it shows up. So they did pre and post group surveys for the family members who participated in the group. And here we have the caregiver descriptions of feelings before on the left and after on the right. So what sticks out? I mean, overwhelmed, confused, unsure, alone, and then just a significantly impactful change of words, even just after these groups. I mean, better was just one word that really stands out. Granted, these were immediately before and immediately after, but it definitely does show that there was some impact on the verbal or wordage descriptions of how they were feeling. They also did a similar pre and post survey for the siblings, and sad was one of the words that just really stuck out before, and then after was happy. So not to be too basic about it, but I'm happy to see these kids even just using these words. Happy, better, Drew. So that will be something else. I do have here, with the help of our lovely tech people, there was a highlight of the sibling support program at Cambridge Health Alliance
so we're there, right?
The sibling support program is part of a family-centered care approach where you also attend to the needs of the family as well.
When I first started doing the sibling support group, I think my sister was a couple of weeks in at Cambridge Hospital. I wasn't talking to anybody about it, and I just needed a place where I can talk about how I was dealing with it.
It can involve things like helping them cope, because often it's a traumatic experience.
This felt good to get a lot of stuff off my chest. I didn't want things to keep building up and then having a moment where I was just explode.
So that is one of the siblings, Harry, who is super dear to my heart. I don't know if he would know that I'm saying that, but he is. I ended up running a couple or co-leading a couple groups where he attended at UMass as well. So he's a real voice for the group and one of the returning members, which is awesome because he'll make other people feel comfortable with even being there. That being said, I wanted to talk about my specific history and participation in the UMass Sibling Support Group. The principles from the IRB approved study at CHA were applied to this program, which was grant funded and works closely with the siblings of the youth who originally were seen in the Can Do clinic specifically. So the Can Do clinic, as far as everybody knows, is a pretty specialized department clinic here for children and adolescents with neurodevelopmental disorders. So that's where they recruited the majority of the participants at first. And the program again continued to rely on these big goals of increasing resiliency, decreasing trauma, increasing the parental competency and competence. I think was an important piece that I might be skipping over because I was so heavily involved with the siblings. Increased stabilization of the family, reduce readmission rates to higher level of care. And then a key point I want to hit on is strengthening the trainee skills and facilitating the family-centered interventions. So one thing I think that is specifically unique about this program is that it's avoiding kind of this drop-off model of, okay, I'm going to drop my child off at this group, go ahead, great, get some support, good job. And no one's going to really talk about what that meant. Did you have fun? What'd you learn? It was fine. So during these sibling support groups, there's also a simultaneous parent support, caregiver support group going on at the same time. So they really do reinforce each other. That being said, there's trained parent mentors that are running the parent group, and then trainees such as residents, medical students, even like OT therapists, physical therapists, psychology interns, all have gone through this training of helping facilitate group therapy. And so it's a really great, pretty easy way of getting more exposure to running those groups. That being said, they also added this like debrief with the parents afterwards. So often one of the co-leaders of the group would go into the parent group afterwards and say, a lot of the kids, in as vague terms as we all know how to use, really enjoyed communicating about shared experiences. There was a lot of coping skills sharing, and everybody ate pizza and loved it. There's also a debrief afterwards with the trainings with trainees, which kind of served as their own little like supervision. They're on less than a hand, I can count times where there were concerns for safety, where a sibling might say, somebody had been physically hit or assaulted or however they put it. And that's a great place to kind of go and discuss what the best next steps would be. So free of charge, includes dinner for both trainees and families. Awesome. Loved it. Let's keep going. I'm in this to win this. 2020 comes. We are no longer in person. We pivot to a virtual platform, which, like everything in residency, is a learning opportunity. It was wild. There was people talking in the chat, scribbling on the screen, just chaos. But it was also a really great way of seeing into our patients' homes, and expanding the amount of people who could participate. So insight into their home life. Internet accessibility, as I'm sure we all kind of recognize, was a lot more prevalent as far as who did and did not have access and who did and did not have more than one iPad or computer. And this became quite apparent, especially when we're trying to run 2 virtual groups at the same time. And oftentimes kids had to adapt to what they were trying to communicate about their struggles with a sibling when they're in a home where, you're sitting there on Zoom and someone's sibling busts in the room. And you're thinking, oh, okay, that's why you're in the closet next time, because your safe places is where you have a place to talk about it. So it's it was a big eye-opening experience, I think, for everybody. That being said, everybody did children are wildly adaptive. They ran with it, they rocked, they rolled. A lot more people ended up joining the monthly groups. So I would say there's about average of 30 to 40 siblings per group since then. And it's no longer just the families of children who are seen at Can Do, but it's people from Illinois, across all the entire country, where sometimes there's not like even a definitive diagnosis for their sibling, but they know something is going on. And that's been pretty cool to see. So I wanted to walk us through a structured pretend what it would look like in a group, as both a selling point if you want to do it, and then also things to take away if you're sitting in front of a patient, you want to know more about what's going on. So we usually start with, this is a safe space. We have group rules, and depending on their age, now it's broken up into different like age groups, which is really cool, because when we were all together, there might be a 5-year-old with a 13-year-old, and they were awesome at supporting each other, but this was kind of a more age appropriate delineation. So either I would read them depending on the age group, or somebody else would. And so it starts with, this is a safe space. We kind of elaborate on that as far as you can say kind of how you feel here. We respect one another. If somebody has a differing opinion about something, that's okay. We still have to respect one another. And what happens in the Zoom stays in the Zoom. That being said, again, we had to kind of give the, unless you or someone, like we're really concerned for your safety. And there was not a lot of pushback to this, actually. I thought kids don't want to, after having spent all day on Zoom, come somewhere where the first thing you talk about is rules. But I never had any pushback, because the next thing was a Starburst game. When we were in person, there were actual starbursts and we could pick different colors, so it made it a little more interactive. But our lovely trainees here helped turn it into an internet interactive thing, which is awesome. This starburst game, Emily let me know, was adapted from Sib Shop and activity with their permission and tailored to specific kind of questions about safety and more emotional kind of aspects of their thoughts and interactions with their siblings. So my role as group leader oftentimes included also being a transcriber. So this actually was a pretty cool thing about going virtual, is I could just mute myself really quick and type, and someone else could kind of pick up the question where we were. And it was really a really cool tandem way of working with each other. That being said, I have so many transcripts, and it was really awesome to go back and kind of read the different codes and different answers, everyone kind of bouncing off each other, certain things. So I thought we would look at some of these questions, and then I have some quotes that I wrote out that are verbatim from different kids' answers that are pretty impactful. So these are the structured questions, and every time we played this game, those were always them, making this not only interactive, but a good kind of way to get a lot of data transcripts for the answers to these questions. Let's see. This was selfishly, I was really just so happy to see this be a question that came up, because it is so telling as far as the child experience, how they're answering this question. This girl wrote, and I'm going to try to read it as she wrote, as far as what do you tell other people about your sibling? I never really tell people that I'm not close with that. I never really tell people that I'm not close with that much about my family in general, or just any of my personal life. I like telling my close friends. For people that I just met, I say I have 2 older sisters. One is 18 and one is whatever. When they ask if she's going to college, I say she's disabled. I don't like to get into details unless they're my close friend, I can trust them, or I know I'm never going to see them again. Which is a pretty impactful statement for this 13-year-old group member to make. And this was her second time actually coming back. That was like my favorite, to see other people who would come back, because they kind of wanted to see the people that they connected with before. This it's always nice to start with a what makes you happy. A lot of positive kind of strengths that I've learned from people here at UMass as well. And this 13-year-old boy in 2021 wrote, so what makes me happy about my sibling? I'm just thankful that I have a sibling and that I have someone to love me. And I know that I have somebody who cares for me. Even if sometimes they don't show it, I know they love me and care for me. That's what makes me happy. Just the fact that I have one and I can say hi every day. So simple things such as just saying hi, things that you don't really think about, but that these kids are able to so amazingly verbalize and find gratitude for, of even if I can't, interact physically or emotionally how I want to, I can say hi every day and I know they care about me. As far as this last question, if you could change one thing in your life, what would it be? And I've seen attendings and mentors ask this question on rounds, on outpatient clinic, and I think the answers are so awesome every time. So it's really cool that we included this. This question might be the first one that someone picks, it might be the last one. So a lot of the times it might be doused after a conversation of our siblings, or it might just be the first thing. So you get a lot of, I'd have $1 million and I'd play all the video games and I'd buy my parents a car. Cool, awesome, sounds great. But then a lot of the times without even prompting, kids would just immediately start talking about their siblings. Like they were just like waiting to do it. The 16-year-old boy in 2020 said, so what I would do, I would probably this would be a smart move. I would take away his ADD. So then there wouldn't be as much stuff that was wrong and stuff. And he wouldn't be as out of control with his behaving, and we would be able to get along better. It would be a big change. So the 16-year-old used his one thing in his life. He would take away his brother's ADD. There's sometimes a benefit to knowing and labeling a diagnosis where it kind of explains a lot of things that are going on and makes the family feel more comfortable. And I'm not sure if that's how he was feeling, but he definitely sounds like out of control behaviors had been getting in the way of them getting along, and that he was looking for a change, and he would use this one wish to do so. So the post-group survey is something that we did every single time. One of them was, what was your favorite part of today's group? What would you change to make it better? I included what was your favorite part, because I think that's a cool way to think about it. You get a lot of different answers. And this one girl, my biggest worry was, oh my gosh, these kids, it's 5:30. I don't think this is what they want to be doing, but I was blown away every time. So this, she was a 14-year-old girl. This is her first time coming and said, I like how it feels like I'm in a class, in a school class, but it's like the best class ever because you're not restricted to anything. And it doesn't really feel like I have teachers telling me to do stuff. It's the only class where I get to talk about how I feel. I don't really talk about my family or my siblings with people that I just met, you know, like only 2 of my friends I actually talk to about that stuff. Most of the people I know don't even know I have siblings. So there's this giant sense of isolation as far as what you're willing to share with other people, but then also highlighting that this group, while structured, doesn't feel like you're being told what to do. You're always given the opportunity to pass, not answer, bounce off of somebody else. But again, it's the only class where I get to talk about how I feel. And I thought that was a pretty cool answer. So as far as future directions, some of our most recent graduates, Joshua Ferrianti and then Ariella, who is also going into child psychiatry, published a data brief and also a paper on the research done throughout this group. And I got my first publication as well here, talking about the virtual pivot in 2020 as far as sibling support groups go. There was research or findings to suggest that these programs showed notable benefits in families whose child was diagnosed with autism. And this is from 2022 after we, the sibling support group at UMass wasn't just working with kids in the Can Do clinic. So it begs the question, is there a diagnosis specific impact on the benefits? And if so, what can we do to go down that rabbit hole and see what can be tailored to like supporting unique kind of diagnoses? There's also going to be highlighting family cohesion and childhood trauma in the new pre and post surveys. They're going to be coming out the next kind of restructuring. And this is also me just plugging that there's opportunities for the trainees to facilitate group therapy. This is actually a ACGME requirement, I think, for psychiatry to be involved in or help lead group therapy. And accidentally, you can fulfill this requirement for fun, which is a cool way to do it. And that's the way I did. It's also available as a rotation for medical students, residents, and others, like I said, like psychology interns and OT trainees and PT as well. The next thing to look out for is that the IT department is building a new website, so that should be easier to navigate and kind of use as a resource to give to families if you think maybe their sibling might benefit. So that's what's coming ahead, so stay tuned. My personal clinical takeaways here about this sibling support group and child and adolescent mental health care in general. We have this train in its tracks again. And so what I took away is if I'm seeing a patient, a child, adolescent, they have a mental illness, kind of look at the whole picture as we're taught, but keeping in mind the statistics and the history. A lot of times these diagnoses aren't in a silo. A lot of the times there's going to be an increased risk for family members to have associated anxiety and depression as well. Take a look at their living environment. Zoom really showed a lot here as far as their community, their family structure. Is it grandparents who are primary caretakers? What's their relationship like with them? Are there other siblings in the house? What are the resources that they have? What hobbies do they like? All of these different pieces you can try your best to make a good picture of what their best quality of life in the community would look like. And then, you know, this group really got me comfortable just asking. As someone again. And I think my family is full of amazing people and everybody's doing their best. But growing up, there was a discomfort in trying to talk about something that you don't really understand and you can tell is impacting your family and the people you love. And you learn quickly that not talking about it often doesn't create a rift. So you get pretty good at that. From leading these groups, I think I could not recommend enough just asking these kids, where are you at in these milestones in your life? How about your siblings? Is your sibling going to get their driver's license? Are they going to get it and you didn't? How does that feel? Or are they going off to college? That's going to be a big transition if they're leaving the house. Or are you going to college and they're not? And kind of all of these differences in what feels fair, what doesn't. Talking to them about their worries, I think is crucial, not to inundate them with, fear, but kind of asking these open-ended questions. And if you ever need to think of some, go back to the Starburst game. It's a really great thing to fall back on. And it just really begs further questions that ultimately end up getting answered. Kind of without much else, because these kids, if you can't tell, are kind of really dying to talk about this. Listening to points of conflict between siblings and, not really begging what sets you off, but really listening and highlighting, okay, it seems like this is where there's a lot of contention, or this is something that we can anticipate. Like, again, we need to either strengthen those tracks or find a different way around it with tools that we either have or can learn together. And just listening to their areas of strengths as well. Whether that's their individual strengths, their strengths within a relationship. Oh, you guys are really good at playing video games together. Like, you guys can really get along with that. That's awesome. Kind of exploring what's helpful there and where can we bring that into the real world as well. Normalizing, I think, is a big deal, because there's a lot of time spent with these children growing up, seeing their friends with siblings, thinking that does not look like my family. And hearing these kids in the support group say, your brother punches holes in the wall too, is kind of an illuminating thing to watch them just connect on that. So normalizing, if you can, a lot of kids have siblings that are struggling. Do you feel like you have natural supports that you can identify? Maybe not using that language, but doing your best. You're really great at writing. Your writing is really great. Do you do that when you're feeling upset? How about your artwork? Your basketball is great. Like, do you want to go outside and do that? Blow off some steam. As well as outpatient supports, such as, the lovely kind of multi-team approach to Can-Do Clinic, and also these programs that you might not even know exist. So those were my clinical takeaways. I'm hoping to kind of instill these thoughts, or at least stimulate some curiosity the next time that you're interacting with someone who may have a large family dynamic that you might not have been able to really investigate and find ways to support. So I would like to take questions and say thank you to everybody at UMass and the Sibling Support Group, my friends and family and loved ones. This is me supporting my little sister in true 90s gear, and she's a princess. And here's some references. And if you'd like to get involved, any residents, this is kind of a plug. Feel free to scan this code and that will take you to the page, or visit the website listed here. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
So we have a lot of questions on Zoom. I don't know if anybody in the room had a question. Oh, wait. Otherwise, the Zoom people can't hear you.
Hi, I'm a child life specialist in the pediatric emergency department. So, hello. Hi. So I see a lot of kids coming in mental health crisis, very regularly, who I think oftentimes we don't see their siblings in these settings because they're at home, especially with COVID. We can't have anybody under 18 visiting. So I think that sometimes the siblings here might get left behind in this mental health crisis. So I'm wondering if this is something that is currently offered to this particular population, like the siblings of the mental health patients that are coming in at this time, or if this is something that maybe we could start offering, or if that's in the works. I don't know. Just curious.
I love it. I love that thought. So where it's at right now, I don't want to throw more on Emily's plate, but like absolutely. I think if there's any way that someone can benefit from this, whether you're meeting them in the ER or on the street or through a neighbor friend, like go for it. There's no specific requirements, and they can contact Emily to kind of get involved. Yeah, because the emergency room visits are wildly up, and especially with like the boarding crisis too, there's a lot to make sense of that at home. I would love that. It'd be great.
Thanks. I just wanted to see if this is something that, you know, if I recognize a family that is kind of in distress, like parents are explicitly stating that their siblings are, you know, suffering in a way, that this would be really great to offer to those families. So cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
By the way, Emily Rubin is on the Zoom and is happy to take questions. But here's a question from Dr. Ed Tronick. Are there early gender differences, especially in comorbidity?
As far as comorbidity, I know that gender differences, as you increase in age for adolescents, you're more likely to see depression diagnosis in females, as well as, you know, again, what goes along with that anxiety. But I think that's kind of the one thing that's popping off to the top of my head right now. I'm sure there's others I can look up.
Okay. Dr. DeGrush was wondering what type of family therapy is available to families with adult children with ASD and struggling with behavioral concerns in our system.
So there actually, I think there's a lot more for caregivers of people with adult children with ASD. If you go on the NAMI website, I found a lot of different resources as far as like virtual support groups or different kind of in-person ones as well. Google can be a best friend here, but definitely through NAMI, there was a lot more adult ASD support groups.
Last question from Dr. Tronick. Are there ever meetings of the whole family?
They're all together essentially, but I think the key here was to give the siblings a feeling of like, this is for you. This is your unique room. This is your unique kind of place to talk about what you're feeling. I'm sure maybe there's been things that have come up where someone has thought, oof, they could benefit from kind of an in-person discussion. But as far as my experience with the sibling support group program, it's more so just kind of popping over to the parent group and saying, things went well, we talked about this, separate but simultaneous for the most part.
Thank you. This was very, very interesting. Thank you very much.
Oh, yeah.